The Insights Idaho Department of Finance communicates department news and perspectives to aid consumers in making educated financial decisions and to inform both industry and consumers of regulatory and consumer protection issues.
Hello, welcome to the third episode of Insights. I'm Celia Kenny, Consumer Affairs Officer with the Idaho Department of Finance, and I'm excited again to introduce our speakers for this segment of our two-part series highlighting Idaho state chartered banks. Today we will hear about how this industry has transformed over time and how the benefits that banking locally extend to you as Idaho consumers, to local businesses, and to Idaho communities. With us to cover this topic, we have Salvador Cruz, Financial Institutions Bureau Chief with the Idaho Department of Finance, and Trent Wright, President and CEO of the Idaho Bankers Association. Trent has served as President and CEO there since 2015 and also serves as Chairman of the City of Eagle Planning and Zoning Commission, the American Bankers Association Credit Task Force, and the Boise Metro Chamber Financial Services Industry Advisory Board. Before this time, Trent served as top executive for the Idaho Automobile Dealers Association, working as a government affairs director and lobbyist for the Ada County Realtors Association, as well as serving as a legislative assistant in Washington, D.C. I am very excited to be here with Trent and Sal today, and I appreciate both of your time and sharing valuable information with our listeners. With that, I'll go ahead and transition to you, Sal. Please take it away.
Thank you, Celia, and thank you, Trent, for taking the time out of your day to be with us. I know that you're very busy and you have a lot of things going on, and we appreciate your time. It's kind of interesting. Listening to your bio, you're well accomplished and you have a lot of things that you've done for several industries, most recently the banking industry. One point on my bio, I'm the Financial Institutions Bureau Chief. I'm responsible for banks, credit unions, and trust companies in Idaho. And today we really want to highlight the value of community banking and state chartered institutions in Idaho. And to help me tell that story, today we have Trent. Trent, let's go ahead and just jump into this. Can you share a little bit about yourself and where your passion for Idaho community banks comes from?
Well, I appreciate that. I've gotten to know the Bankers Association members over the last 7 years, and going through the pandemic and the PPP process really brought home so many of those feelings that a lot of us tend to forget about what banks do, what they don't do, what they stand for. And to watch these professionals work diligently from home, because we weren't in our offices, and to make sure that the state of Idaho stayed running is just a story that it's really undertold, it's undersold, and we can't tell it enough. But the process that the community bankers go through to make sure that their communities stay alive is just so important. In my bio, as was mentioned earlier, I did work for the Car Dealers Association. Not so much your Fairly Reliable Bobs, but your Ford, Chevy, and Honda dealers of the world. That was one of our selling points is, they were the ones that donated the scoreboards for the Little League team and donated the vehicles for the homecoming. Bankers are very much in the same way, but they're also funding the entire ballpark, not just the scoreboard for the little team. They're providing jobs, and they're dream creators for many people's entrepreneur aspirations. They're funding local government when tax receipts come short. And not only that, providing many jobs that are good, well-paying jobs that last for a long time. And it's just a really undersold story with the PPP process. As I mentioned earlier, the Paycheck Protection Plan might not be everybody's favorite topic, but if you think about it from the standpoint that banks, specifically community banks that we're talking about today, state chartered banks, we pushed out almost $4 billion in lending to our communities to keep Idaho going when people weren't at work. And it's just so important. That wasn't money that was given by the federal government and pushed out by banks. That was banks extending their own credit and pushing that out there. And so your question was, where does my passion come from? It's from seeing firsthand the dedication and the process and the love for their community that these banks push out. And whether it's the smallest 200-person rural community that we may have a branch in, or here in Boise, the same passion is across the board out there, and it's just it's an undertold story.
And along those lines, here it comes in the IBA's role. Can you share with the Idaho consumer who the IBA is and what you do for Idaho state chartered institutions?
You bet. So the Idaho Bankers Association was created in 1905. I think that we're just 1 year younger than the Department of Finance. So I think one of the first bank charters was, I know the first bank charter, I think, or the oldest one still in existence, was Ireland Bank. Then D.L. Evans came along, and then shortly after the Department of Finance came along, and then the bankers said, well, I think we probably better create an association to help and to work with our regulators. So the association's been around a long time. We had our first full-paid staff in the early 70s, and we've been on the ground ever since with that staff. My role as the president of the organization is multiple hats, whether it's being the lobbyist over at the State House, whether it's taking bankers to Washington, D.C. to advocate on behalf of the Banking Association with our regulators, the FDIC, the OCC, the Fed, the CFPB, a lot of other acronyms out there, or working with our congressional delegation. We have an emerging leaders program. This year was our first class of 23 students. We've had 2 cohorts, and the third one is coming up. And interestingly enough, Sal, we're out on the verge of asking you to come speak to that emerging leaders group. That'll be in August. We've got an executive development program for that mid-level management group that's maybe looking to further their career within the bank, and what does that look like? And also the bank wants to test them to see what skills that they have to if they want to also further promote them. And then we also work with multiple graduate schools of banking, Pacific Coast Bankers School, Graduate School of Banking in Colorado, Madison, Stonier, to help those bankers further their careers. And then lastly, in the education space, we're beginning conversations with the College of Business and Economics here at Boise State to see what a school of banking would look like, being able to turn out anywhere from 50 to 85 bankers a year with automatic jobs kind of at the end of their school curriculum. It's a need from the labor side of it, from all the financial institutions that are out there, not just banks. But it's a real opportunity, I think, for many students, whether they're younger students or middle-aged students that have gone back to school later on in life. Banking provides a career second to none in many ways. It's very long-lasting. It pays well. You're around, bright-minded people that are really community involved. And I think that whenever we have those meetings where we invite people to come learn about banking, they're always packed. So that one's a little bit more lengthy in time for getting brought to the forefront, but we are trying to come up with a school of banking in Idaho. And interestingly enough, when we started those conversations with the College of Business and Economics, they are unaware, and we're unaware of any other industry that has gone to BSU and said, through this particular college, can you create a specific business plan or action plan or school that churns out a product like this. And so we're really proud of at least being the first and trying to do something. A lot of questions that need to be answered between here and then, but I think it's an important thing to mention. And then I think last but not least, we do a lot of political activity in addition to the government affairs advocacy component of it. We have a federal political action committee. We have a state political action committee on behalf of pro-business minded leaders, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. It doesn't really matter to us. So we do a lot. Last thing I'll mention here is the Bankers Association is just 3 people. And so between that, we all wear a lot of hats, and just can't say enough about my staff that's out there. They do an amazing job, and I'm very happy that they're part of the team.
So how do you find time to do anything else? It sounds like your plate's rather full.
That's a great question. I enjoy what I do. I've got a wonderful family, and they're pretty understanding of my time. But there's a lot of opportunities for downtime and family time as well. So don't feel too sorry for me for being busy.
Fair enough. Right now is a good time to talk about what a community bank is and how is that different from other financial institutions?
Great question. And we actually have a very in-depth marketing campaign to articulate what those differences are. Anybody right now can go to idaho.bank and look up a lot of answers to your questions about what the differences are between a large bank, a regional bank, a community bank, a credit union, farm credit. There's a multitude of different financial institutions out there. I think that we're focused primarily on community banks and what a community bank means to Idahoans out there through this marketing campaign. We have had this idea for probably about a decade. My predecessor that ran the association got it started, and we've really brought it to fruition. But we went to all of the banks out there that we define as community banks. They're not only just state chartered institutions, which you're in charge of, Sal, but those institutions who have deposits less than $3 billion in the state of Idaho's borders qualify for community bank status with the Idaho Bankers Association. And so we went to those 15 banks and we asked them to participate financially in a marketing campaign that was measurable, that had metrics, that's something that we could show them. And believe it or not, we got 100% support. We didn't get it overnight. It took a lot of road trips and a lot of talking and a lot of demonstration. But we did get their support, and the marketing campaign's aim is, if I walked out of this podcast right now and on the street and asked the first person I walked up to, what's the difference between a community bank and a regional bank and a large bank, I can't imagine too many people would know, or they'd give you kind of a random answer. The goal of our marketing campaign after 5 years is that we'll ask that same question, and through the education, either on social media, through the website, or wherever other advertising mediums, it'll really show the differences in their answers and what a community bank means and what it may not mean, and the benefits. And ultimately, that education is out there to help lengthen the road for a community bank in Idaho into the future, but also to allow clients, customers, constituents, whatever the right name is for it, to make better educated decisions on what they're doing with their hard-earned money right now and where they want to put it, what they want to invest in, and how they want to work with their banker moving forward. So we're really proud of it. Please check it out. It's idaho.bank. But you can also go to instagram.com/communitybank and facebook.com/communitybank. We've got them all. I tried to get community.bank for a URL, but believe it or not, there's a private company in Australia that bought that, and they're not really ready to give it up. And what they offered to sell it to me for was way too much of an asking price. But the goal was to make it a regional campaign. We pitched this idea to the national associations in Washington, D.C. We've gotten a lot of support for it. Instead of the national associations promoting community bank campaigns on a national level, we've advocated that maybe a regionalization is probably a better approach. We can share the metrics, we can share the data, we can share the information, and I think it's going to be a better product. And since we started this marketing campaign on what a community bank is and why you should believe in them, the first week in February, for starters, our goal in a year was 2.7 million views. We hit 1.3 million in the first 85 days. And of the 1.3 million, we had 94% completion rate of the marketing and advertising materials that we put out there. And that's pretty good numbers. So about a penny per click on our spend. So we're very judicial with the spending of the bankers' money that they're giving us. We're getting good rate and viewership and good rate turnover on it. So I think it's an effective campaign, and I think it's going to pay dividends for our community banks and for our state. And hopefully you'll be seeing some of that information at the Department of Finance soon, Sal. So now there is a difference between community banks and state chartered banks, but I think one and the same, they still are after the same goal, which is to serve their community.
You'd mentioned earlier, you brought up a name, Ireland Bank. And I think this is a good segue to talk about the fact that Ireland Bank was the first state chartered bank in Idaho in 1892. There have been a lot of things that have changed in Idaho since 1892. I can think of only a couple, maybe my phone being one of them. Can you talk a little bit about how has the industry evolved since that time? And then the follow-up is, how has it stayed the same?
Wow, what a great question. Well, for starters, the CEO of Ireland Bank, Bruce Lowry, is the chairman of my board of directors for the Idaho Bankers Association. And Bruce is an excellent individual. He runs an amazing bank. They're in a lot of communities that are very small and only served by Ireland Bank. They have been around for seemingly ever in the state of Idaho. I think looking at the evolution of banking in that time, it's changed significantly, and one of the biggest changes is the regionalization of the branch banking. In other words, when D.L. Evans set out to create banking, they I think there was a dozen or so, and they all had different names, and they all had different directors, and they all had different asset and deposit thresholds and requirements. And now that's really not a case, and except for maybe a few states that are out there. It's the regionalization of a bank within a state is probably one of the biggest changes. The addition of untold pages of regulations, whether they be the Department of Finance regulations, whether they be federal regulations, those are the biggest changes. Just to have some obvious ones. Banking is one of the most regulated industries in the nation out there, as it should be. We're taking people's hard-earned money and we're watching it for them and moving forward with it. I think some of the other changes are interesting with fintech and what's happening with digital currency, digital assets, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. Right? Nobody would have thought in the early 1890s of could even contemplate what that is. Right? It was very simple, just the receivership of those deposits and moving forward. FDIC insurance wasn't invented back then, so you were really hoping that the bank wouldn't get robbed. In many ways, funny story. When I took over the Bankers Association, you used to walk into our office, and there's an old Western photo right on the main entrance of a bank robbery. I never got that. That photo went by the wayside with them at the first month I was there. But so FDIC insurance. But back to the fintech and the digital assets and the cryptocurrency. We're getting into a space now that banks are going to be able to take a digital asset that somebody owns, whether that's an NFT or a currency or some sort of other crypto, non-fungible token of some type. They'll be able to securitize it through a bank and collateralize it and be able to lend against it in the near future. Just this last year, we passed the first set of definitions of what a digital asset is in the state of Idaho and defined it as personal property for taxation purposes. Might not be what everybody wants to hear from the tax side of the discussion, but at least now you're able to do something with it other than online spending or what your mythical worth may be. It's interesting to note this morning, I thought, they said in the last 6 months, Bitcoin's worth has dropped to, I think 53%, so even the digital currency space right now is taking a beating from the market, and it's more normalized, I think, than people were ready to accept just maybe 6 months or 12 months ago as far as its involvement in the economy right now. Some of the things that may have stayed the same with community banks over the last 130, 140 years would be just the commitment to service, the commitment to culture, and providing those opportunities in the community. I sound like a broken record when I talk about it, but in so many ways, that's really what these banks, that's their bread and butter, right? They have to evolve to stay relevant, but ultimately it's about providing the value to the community, taking those deposits and lending them back into the community so the communities can grow and people can have their dreams realized.
Can you speak about the impact the community banks have on local communities and perhaps provide a few examples?
It's just being able to work with that municipality and lend them back the money that they need to keep going. I think in many ways, infrastructure is a good one. Infrastructure means different things in the state of Idaho, whether you're here in Ada County or maybe up north where rural broadband isn't as prevalent, or some of our rural areas where broadband isn't as prevalent. So working with the community to make sure that those projects get funded in a timely fashion would be a great example of community building that all banks get involved in it at many levels. It's just as important to them whether they're a small bank, a medium bank, or a large bank as it would be to the customer or the citizen out there that really needs that.
In what ways do Idaho businesses benefit from a relationship with a community bank?
I think that the answer is the completeness that the community bank brings to the discussion of what the business may need. I think a lot of savvy business owners can find information from A to Z, and it's multiple vendors, multiple efforts, multiple discussions. I think that truly you can work with a community banker who is part of the community, and they'll be able to give you the full story from A to Z. We have so much real estate lending and development lending that's going on in Idaho in just about every county, right? And that's a good example. You need to be practicing your business borrowing endeavors with a community banker that's there and knows how to structure that deal, what they've seen, what they haven't seen. And I think that ultimately it's going to provide a better product in this business sense, especially on the development side. I've heard that story many times where business leaders have gone out and, we used to be at the bank, then we went away from the bank, we saw what we're missing, and we came back and we're so much more happier. It may not always be the most cost-effective decision to make, but ultimately they're more happy because the product is better at the end, and the decisions that they're arriving at are much more thought out, and I think they're arriving at where they want to be at the end of their project and their business decisions.
We've spent some time talking about banking and even individuals having accounts and businesses having a relationship with a financial institution. There is a subset of Idaho consumers and consumers nationally, for that matter, that have a savings account or a checking account, but may not qualify for a loan or a checking account for that matter. And we term that underbanked. And then there's another subsect that falls along those lines where they just, for whatever reason, whatever life event or financial event that happened in their life, they cannot get access to the banking system. Can you speak a little bit to what are Idaho community banks doing in that regard, and what can they do to reach the underbanked and the unbanked?
Fantastic question. Actually, just was on a webinar this morning, as I mentioned, with the FDIC talking about this very topic. And I think for starters, if I'm communicating directly with the community bankers out there, is work through your social media platforms. Hashtag Get Banked is out there. Hashtag Get Banked dash ESP for our Spanish speaking population that's in Idaho. I think just getting them more informed of what opportunities are out there from a social media front, very easy to do. Go back to what I was talking about with the community bank marketing. If the Idaho Bankers Association is able to get as many views in the first 85 days as I mentioned, I know that these banks can do it with their amazing marketing teams that are out there. But other things that community banks are doing are kind of twofold. One, through the Bankers Association, we have been advocating at the State House, along with a lot of the ag producer, lobbyist, and interest groups that are at the State House, for driver's identification cards for our undocumented population. Again, not the most popular topic at the State House, as you can imagine, but our undocumented population serves a very vital role in our community, like it or not. But they're sending a lot of their paycheck monies not only out of the state, but out of the United States, and sending it home. And they're doing that for many reasons, but the number one reason is because they can't get a bank account. They cannot show up without identification. The Know Your Customer is not being met as one of the regulations that are on the bank. An open account and put that money and be able to spend it within the community through whatever measure they want to spend it by. And so we have advocated, and will continue to advocate, that there needs to be driver's identification cards issued in the state of Idaho for our undocumented population. Not only so they can get back to, they can be I don't know, we use the word regulated, but when they're driving, they can be more accounted for on our roads and held accountable in situations which they're already driving for, but also so they can provide that identification at the financial institution, so they're able to create a checking account, a savings account, and move forward. Now, we're not talking about being able to establish 529 plans for college for their kids, or state-funded IRA accounts, which is another program that we're trying to get through with Representative Rod Furness and the AARP. Just a simple checking account and savings account, so this money is not leaving our economy. So the undocumented population can get a bank account. That's couldn't be more at the heart of your question, is what are we doing? And the simple things of an identification card is just very key. On to other programs. There's the Bank On program, which is a product that allows community banks to charge very low fees for savings accounts for the population that is underbanked in the state of Idaho. Provide a little bit of revenue back to the bank to administer and facilitate these accounts. But it comes with a lot of education for the unbanked population on why they should get in this atmosphere. So Bank On is a program that the Idaho Bankers Association supports and puts information out there. I think that one of the things that we've seen is a tremendous amount of growth in the 44 counties since 2017, when the Bank On program was really rolled out through the end of 2021. The interactive maps that we've seen show that anybody who's within, I think it's 20 or 30 miles of a branch or a bank that offers these Banked On programs, we're seeing the percentages of the unbanked population in Idaho really depreciate in many ways. And it just, obviously there's large swaths of nothing there because it's just federal lands in many ways. But if people are close to a bank and the bank offers these Bank On programs, the underbanked and unbanked population is really coming around and getting the services that they really need in many ways.
You mentioned a little bit about these rural communities. In some communities, you have 200, 600 people and one financial institution. The department has, over the years, we receive phone calls from the community leaders as a financial institution folds up shop and leaves the community. And you know just as well as I do that not only is having a financial institution in a rural community a badge of honor, it's also the heart and the lifeblood of that local community. And these community leaders ask the Department of Finance, is there anything we can do? And I guess I kind of turn that question over to the IBA, and what should communities do if they're seeing an exodus of financial institutions from their community? With the full understanding that part of the reason a financial institution leaves has to deal with economics. If a branch location is not profitable, it has to make business sense for both sides.
It's a very great question. We had our Bankers Association Board of Directors just last week, and this topic came up very thoroughly. And the answer is they need to get in touch with us, get in touch with other community leaders, and build more momentum for a different tax structure for rural branch banking in the state of Idaho. It's a competitive issue with other financial institutions that are on a different tax structure, whether they be in the ag lending or in the retail space. And it's an unpopular topic. I don't get the luxury of going to the Capitol and saying, banks get a tax break, and people don't just embrace me and say that's the greatest idea since sliced bread. Usually when I talk about banks and tax policy, it's about, where can we extract more pounds of flesh out of these institutions. So honestly, the community leaders that are fearful that their branch is going to leave their community or it's already left, and what can we do to bring it back? Advocacy on a better tax structure so a competitive fairness elevation is reached. We have other financial institution classes that have that similar provision, and we'd like to look at that. We'd also like to look at and could use help from our community leaders on some of our ATM statutes that we've got out there. What does that look like? if we updated that to have more virtual teller machines. So if, Bank X is leaving your community and they've been there for the last 50 years and you're left without a branch, is there a tax benefit? Is there a different structure? Or should we look at our ATM laws? So maybe a virtual machine is left. That's not everybody's answer that they're going to like to hear. But as you mentioned, it's an economic thing. Labor is an issue. I'm sure many of you have been to a branch lately, and you go in there and there's 2 people in there when there used to be a dozen. That's not the bank being cheap. That's the bank just realizing there's a labor shortage and it's very expensive to do so many things anymore. But I think that we also have an issue with labor in these rural places with people wanting to stick around as well. If the branch manager's been there for 20 years and you're the millennial trying to work your way up, I don't know that you have a lot of incentive to stay there for another decade when there's just nowhere to go. So you're going to move along. Those are all just multiple decisions that compound into this issue of why branches are leaving communities that they've been in with for so long, and why community leaders are struggling to find somebody to come take that spot. I field those phone calls all the time. They're perplexed why somebody doesn't want to be in their community. It's a thriving community. It's not an easy discussion to have. First off, there's nothing I can do about it at the Bankers Association except for on the advocacy and education side. But secondly, I would also take a look around in your community, and if you have other financial institutions that are still there, but your bank's not there, why is that? And in many ways, it is the competitive issue with the tax structure that's different for banks. Yeah. And Sal, if I could also say, I think that there's also a lot of concern and fear, especially from the municipal side of things, about using, your mobile apps, your bank apps that are out there instead of going in and to the branch. And I think some more education could even come from the Department of Finance of the security levels that are out there. Taking a picture of your check and mobile deposit, for example. There's still it's a high percentage of insecurity that's out there on what that means and what it doesn't mean. I think that as our population, ages out, that's going to change, but maybe we could do better at speeding that up with some education from the Bankers Association, from community leaders, from the department. I think that would help in many ways as well.
It sounds like we have our 4th podcast.
Excellent. Rural broadband. That's another big problem, right? That would really help with this mobile deposit and mobile banking situation as well.
Over the last 15 years, what it feels like is we've gone from crisis to crisis. And there are always lessons learned, and there are those individuals that adapt, they're flexible, and they move with the market. And I believe our community banks have done that. And they've stepped up to the plate when asked to. I think one of those key areas that our financial institutions don't get enough credit for is what was asked of them in April of 2020, and subsequently when the CARES Act was passed. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening during that time, and how Idaho community banks stepped up to the plate?
Yeah, of course. I think what they were being asked to do was to keep the economy running. The biggest difference between the TARP program and the Great Recession and the CARES Act and PPP program during the pandemic was, in the TARP program, the federal government transplanted dollars onto the balance sheets of all the banks and said, this is how you're going to spend our money, and we're going to tell you how to do it. In the pandemic, with the CARES Act and the PPP funding, those were all dollars that were extended from the bank's balance sheets that they had to go either and purchase that money at a risk from other bankers' banks or other financial sources and extend that money. And they had to do it all from home. I think I made that comment at kind of the opening here. We were not at our branches. We were not at our headquarters. They were on laptops that had just been issued to them. They were struggling, just like you were, to get the virtual remote access to the server at the bank. They were doing it. I have this picture of somebody in their robe sitting around their kitchen table, but that's exactly what it is. They were building their home offices while they were managing their kids and trying to order, groceries to be delivered just like everybody else. And they managed to do that and keep the state running. And that's what they were up against. Many banks were able to really grow and profit and benefit the communities from it. We have one bank that quadrupled its size in a little over a year. We had several banks that were already very strong in the small business administration lending process that really were able to benefit and shine from this and help people out in so many ways. The PPP process, the CARES Act, was life-changing. And I think your comment of going from one crisis situation to the next is not lost on me. I think a lot of our banks are looking for a break. I think they'd like to just think that there's hopefully a better times ahead. It's just important. We also came up with several other ideas that the community bankers got involved with in working with the governor's task force that was distributing the CARES Act money, which is different from the ARPA funds, right? The first tranche of money that was pushed out there that the states had to distribute. We were asked our opinion multiple times, and advised that group. We tried to come up with a different plan from the standpoint of allowing small businesses to defer their loans to the bank and allow some of that CARES Act funding to reimburse the bank for the lost interest that was on that. That ultimately wasn't something that the committee that the governor put together saw that they wanted to do. But we also fought back against other things. The treasurer's office wanted $75 million to further regulate banks and get into the space that you are operating in. That was something that community banks fought back very fiercely. We don't need more regulation. I'm not advocating for less regulation, but we don't need more in a time when we're already pulling our weight and then some to help our communities.
What do you see the banking industry looking like in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that you're, quite frankly, going to see larger banks continue to get larger. I think that we have somewhere north of 5,500 banks in the United States. That's down from a little over 17,500, say 35, 40 years ago, give or take a few years. I don't think that example is going to change anytime soon. And I'm not advocating for it. I'm not a Debbie Downer about it either. I just think that it is what it is when we look at the growth of regulation, the cost of doing business, and the labor issue. But I think community banks are going to continue to be community banks and serve their areas of interest very well in that time. I don't think that's a message of panic, that everybody needs to go out and start looking for the strongest community banks to put their deposits in by any means. I think that when you wake up in 60 months from now and we look at this question about what you and I were talking about what community banking looks like, I think that we're still going to have those 15 community banks in Idaho that we do today, at least by our definition of it, plus the state charters. But I think by and large, they're going to see more consolidation. It's a tough conversation to have when you've got a board of directors that need to do the best for their bank. And if there's an offer on the table to be purchased and it's the right thing to do for the shareholders, then they have to enter into those discussions. And that's the part about banking I think is lost a lot of times. It is a private business. It is a business endeavor. We don't see a lot of new banks popping up. I don't know. Have you had any applications come in recently, Sal?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, the point being is it's just not something that happens very often. Not very many people want to put in $30 to $50 million into a business endeavor and a 1% return over 10 years. It's a tough business to get into. And so those banks that have made it this far are very strong. They've got a strong balance sheets. They've got good liquidity, and they're going to continue to be there. But we will continue to see consolidation, unfortunately. I think that the other thing to get into this conversation about is the mobile banking apps, the digital space, the digital currency, the payments systems, the FedNow program that's coming along. It's all going to be game changers for the financial institutions that are out there. Whether or not the Federal Reserve gets a central bank digital currency up and running, We are not advocates of a central bank digital currency. It removes deposits from the communities and puts those deposits squarely in the hands of the federal government for the distribution of these digital currencies. It's interesting on that conversation alone, even the Federal Reserve isn't even on the same discussion page. You've got the Federal Reserve of the Fed, regional bank in San Francisco still talking about Fed now, and you've got Fed in Boston talking about CBDC and betting their careers on it. So a lot of things have to happen, but we would be remiss if we just didn't say that a lot of things will also change in the payment systems. And I think you're going to see a lot of banks, double down on their technology spend to be able to adapt to it, because it's what the consumers are looking for. Maybe not in all of the rural parts of Idaho, but many of the consumers that are moving here, many of the consumers that are on the younger generation, they don't go to the branch anymore. They don't deal in checks. They don't even deal in cash. And the financial institutions know that, and they're gearing up for that in many ways. Those are the changes you're going to see in addition to branch numbers and consolidation.
Are there any misconceptions about a community bank that you'd like to address, or any final thoughts you have for our listeners?
Boy, if you still think it's a man or a woman walking around in a pinstripe suit and ties, I'm telling you what, that's just not what I see. And the pandemic even put a more thorough pin in that. I haven't seen a tie. I mean, I'm wearing one right now, but it's because I had some other meetings earlier. But these are just laid back, ordinary people in your community. These are your neighbors. These are their kids go to school with your kids. They're just normal. And I think that the more that you get to know that, and the more that you want to talk with them and be a part of it, you're going to find that they really are very honest, very trustworthy people. There's a reason that there's things that they can't tell you. The regulations say that they can't talk. And it's very misguided, and many times I think that they get a bad rep on, they make decisions that may not be popular with the borrower, but there's reasons and there's risk and there's decisions that come into those decisions that people, they're just never going to understand, right? And so I think your question was, what are misconceptions? And I just think that, I shouldn't say I think, I know that it's not about the dollar at the end of the day every time, and they're not walking around in pinstripe suits. They're not greedy individuals. They're good Americans. They're your neighbors, and you just get to know them and worry about yourself a little bit more sometimes, and things are going to be okay.
Well, thank you for your time, Trent. It's been enlightening, and I always enjoy talking to you and listening what you have to say in your perspective. With that said, I'll turn it back over to Celia.
Thank you. I'd like to also thank Sal and Trent for these talking points today. I know that it's laid a great foundation for consumers and even local businesses and communities to further their understanding of what these local community banks are and the benefits that they bring along with them. So with that, I will just close out and look forward to our future episodes.
We want to thank you for joining us for our production of Insights, the Idaho Department of Finance. We'd love to hear from you and learn more about the ideas and topics that are on your mind. Forward your suggestions and feedback to our email address, finance@finance.idaho.gov.